everyone. Welcome to FO Talks. I'm Heather Heldman Neeman, a board member of Fair Observer. And I have with me here today Esther Wojcicki, who is an acclaimed educator. Today, we're going to talk about the ways in which AI is reshaping education. I think that much of what we discuss will be applicable to K to 12 and perhaps even college and beyond education worldwide. But I do want to note that much of the conversation will be focused on education in the United States. Esther, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. I really like Fair Observer.
I'm glad to hear it. So, before we really get into the nitty-gritty of our conversation on AI, I want to tell you that I read your book, How to Raise Successful People, right around the time that I had my first child. This was a few years ago. And everything you had to say about the trick method really resonated with me. Trick stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And when I read this, I was thinking on the one hand, like these concepts should really not seem like rocket science to people who live in a civilized society. But on the other hand, like they're very much not intuitive for many parents and educators. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind starting off our conversation by just saying a few words about applying the trick method in 2025 versus when you wrote the book versus when your own highly accomplished children were young, and any thoughts you may have today about sort of boosting parental confidence.
Well, thanks for that introduction and for this question. I do think you're right that in today's world, it's not easy to give your children a lot of independence. And there are laws in I don't know how many states, maybe 8 states, that literally prevent you from allowing your child to walk home alone from school, for example. There have been parents that have been arrested for that. But that is not the only thing. That is not the only thing you can do to provide independence for your children. There are other things as well. I think we just need to make the children aware that the world it's actually not less safe. It is just that people perceive it to be less safe than it was. It turns out kidnapping happens very rarely. And if it does, the number one kidnappers are usually family members. So it's not like if you let your child walk down the street to school that they're going to be kidnapped. It's just your fear. The parent's fear is just um, it's really hard for you to control that fear. It's just easier for you to walk your child down to school and then not worry about it. Unfortunately, that's the situation here in the US. There are many cities, rural cities, where it's okay for you to still allow your child to do that. But let's talk about some of the other ways you can give your child some independence. So one of them is in allowing your child to make their own play dates. Parents usually they talk to each other and then they make the play date for the kid. And back in the day when my children were little, they got on the phone themselves and they arranged their own play date themselves. And I don't think I've seen anybody doing that. They are, texting each other and calling each other, and then the kid is like an object. He'll be at my house at this time and vice versa. Uh, and so that's one thing that is really easy to do. A second is I don't think the child actually participates in the schedule. So Monday through Friday, what is your schedule? So of course you go to school, but then after school, what are you doing? The parent controls what the child does after school, and the kid has almost no say. in what they're doing. They're just going from one activity to another based on the parents what they recommend. So that is something you can do, and you don't have to worry about their safety because they're at home or somewhere in a safe place making these calls or texting or whatever. Um, there are multiple things around the house that you can do to give your child more independence and trust. By the way, you're trusting them. I mean, if you want to really show them that you trust them, give them more responsibilities at home. Do you know, we're bringing up a whole generation of kids that are waited on.
I know.
And and we're doing that because we think, oh my God, that's so nice. I'm making his bed for him, I'm doing all these things to help him. What a nice world for him. It is just the opposite. Actually, they need to be in control of their world, and you need to give them more responsibilities. Trust them to make their bed. Okay, maybe it looks a little weird when they're done, but actually
Okay.
they're doing it. Trust them to pick out their own clothes and to go shopping themselves. Shopping is pretty easy. You can go to Target, you can go to, I don't know, they've got great clothing for children at Costco. You can go online on Amazon, you know, but usually the situation is you buy the clothes. I mean, they start rebelling at around the age of 8 or 9. But that frequently is not very successful for them because the parents like, oh, that's too expensive. Oh no, I saw a sale over here. Um, so that's already two things you can do. Okay, a third thing you could do is, on the weekend, everybody plans their weekend and they leave the child out. The child just comes along for the ride. Give them an opportunity to plan the weekend. Like, what are we going to do? Who are we going to take? Where are we going to go to eat? Things like that. That shows the fact that you're giving them that responsibility shows the kid, the child, that you trust and respect their ideas. And that is really, I mean, I cannot tell you how important that is. Also, there are studies that show children that do chores around the house on a regular basis are grow up to be much happier, more self-sufficient, just better people in general. And I just like people that are listening to this, how many chores do you have your kids actually do? Most people don't have their kids do any. Research shows that children of immigrant families that are struggling financially here in the United States, their children tend to do better in many ways because they are required to be part of the family
I have
and
to
not
contribute.
just that's right, they have to be pulling their weight, so to speak. They do things, that help the mother or the father do something. So I'm talking especially to actually the middle class America and upper
Hmm.
middle class America,
Hmm.
because these are the people that are guilty of doing too much for their children.
For kids. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're cutting out their self-image, the fact that you trust them, and I don't think most people trust their kids. Oh, here's another one that you can do, by the way, that I just heard about. If you buy a pet, a cute pet doesn't have to be, difficult pet, a cute dog or a cat. And then that pet is the responsibility of your child. And if they don't feed it, well, that don't go and feed the pet for your child. They need to know that they are responsible for taking care of that pet.
That
It can be
animal is really depending upon
right. And okay, if you don't want a dog or cat, get a fish. I mean,
or a
get
hamster. Yeah, something
or a
easier.
hamster,
Something easier.
something easier. Or, even rats are good pets in the cage. That's it. as long as they don't get out.
Okay,
But
on that note, I mean, I think this is I know that we could speak for an entire hour, probably more, about different methods of instilling independence. And this is again why I want to refer everyone listening to Esther's book, because you will walk away with a world of insight. Um, but Esther, given that we do have a limited time, and I really want to get in some discussion on the prevalence of artificial intelligence today. Let me just kind of pivot the conversation a little bit. You know, when you were teaching and really pioneering one of the country's best, high school journalism programs, you had the privilege of teaching, in Silicon Valley, which is certainly one of the countries, if not the one of the world's, most tech forward communities. And you really had the opportunity to teach over decades that were really pivotal in sort of the birth and development of new technologies that now dominate the lives of most Americans today. And this is certainly, a community that was what I would call an early adapter to the concept of AI, and community that is really at the heart of so much AI technology development. So, as a I would say as a part-time educator, I've done a lot of tutoring and mentoring over the past, 20 years, and I'm now a part-time law professor. I've seen a real evolution in what I would call common discourse about AI in education over the past, 5 years or so. Really an adjustment from suspicion to acceptance to sort of tacit embrace. But I think that a lot of educators and educational institutions are really still grappling with how to integrate AI into learning. And I'm just curious if you have any advice for educators who may be struggling with how to really integrate this new technology into both the teaching and learning process.
well, that's a great question because AI is here, it's ubiquitous, and it's going to even grow further. Um, so, in the initial introduction of AI or generative AI to the schools, their initial reaction was to ban it.
Right.
Los Angeles City Schools banned it, New York City Schools, all the major districts in the United States banned it. And then my question when that was happening is, how effective was it to ban alcohol in the 1920s?
Right.
Did that work? And so slowly they have come to the conclusion that it was not a good idea, and they have made it okay to use it. But they still have not taken the step that I think is the most important, and that is teaching kids how to use it effectively and responsibly. Um, and I'd like to compare AI in some way to automobiles. When automobiles were first introduced in the early 1900s, there were protests against automobiles. And people were like, that's dangerous, horses, it's much easier, cars where you're going to get the gas. There were all kinds of issues. People were complaining and they didn't like it. How would it have been if we gave people cars without any driver's training?
Right. And
So,
just have disaster after disaster.
right. And so we're doing that with AI. We're giving kids an opportunity to use it and not teaching them how to use it. And so there really should be a, a program which gives kids an opportunity to use it in a responsible way. And we should teach them how to do it instead of banning it. I just want you to remember also, you're probably too young for this, but in the 1980s, when calculators were introduced to the schools, they were banned also. It took about 8 years for calculators to be accepted. So people are afraid of new technology and their first reaction is to ban it. And I think it's important to use it intelligently because it's not going to go away. As for teachers,
Yeah.
yes, you had a
I was just
question.
going to say, are there any specific resources that you would recommend for teachers in terms of getting caught up to speed on teaching with AI? Because I see that, it's if you I think teenagers in particular at this moment in history, they're exposed to AI. They're probably going home and experimenting with ChatGPT to some degree on their own, or other, sort of other AI tools, or they have, totally mastered and can run circles around the adults in their lives when it comes to using, generative AI tools for design or for other purposes. Um, but really focusing on getting teachers confident in their own ability to use these tools and to master them and to then bring them into the classroom in a way where they really feel that they are not necessarily like in control, but that they're using the tools effectively.
So let me give teachers an idea that worked for me because I was one of the first teachers in the country to use computers in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have a computer science background.
Right.
And I was also one of the first people to use Adobe, all the Adobe tools in the classroom. So, what I did, because I realized that I was not the expert, I was good at it, but I was not the expert, is I let my students help me. So, what I did, for example, is I said in class, what have you discovered new about the Adobe tools? And can you help teach the class what you learned? And I don't know if you know that today it's the largest media program for students in the country, actually,
I
probably in
did.
the world. Yeah.
Congratulations.
And so, what this did is it gave my students a sense of trust and respect,
Mm-hmm.
and they would search around the web and look for ways, how to do things, how to make magazines, how to make newspapers, how to use Adobe tools. And they brought all that information to class, and I let them present. And
Yeah.
so that gave them speaking skills, gave them a sense of confidence. And that's what they should be doing today in class. What have you discovered about AI that we might be able to all use in class today or tomorrow? And instead of controlling it and saying, this is the only way to do it, that is, I mean, it's not the only way to do it. Honestly, there's many ways to do it. So
Right.
that's one simple way to do it that will empower your kids. And you can say, for example, I helped write another book that is using how to teach critical thinking with
Mm.
a video. This is coming out in a month or so. And it targets a group called myhero.com, where
Okay.
we highlight videos that kids make about heroes, that they heroes in their life. It can be a grandmother, it can be an organization, it can be a community. But what they're doing is they're using AI tools and video tools to create these videos. I mean, the whole world is on video, right? Just look
Right.
at TikTok. Is that a video or not? They're little videos, right? And Facebook Reels, little videos. Everybody's doing video. And so you want the kids to learn how to use that responsibly. And so
Exactly.
that's what the teachers should do. I actually used to bring into class examples of irresponsible use of technology. And I would have them talk about it, and then I would also have them find other examples so that they felt empowered. They felt like they weren't being lectured to. They were part of the discovery group. Uh,
Exactly.
I know this sounds crazy, and I think that most teachers will say, "Oh my God, I can't trust my kids to do that." but you'll be shocked. They will rise to the occasion. They are controlled by what their peers think of them. And so peer pressure will help them produce something that is really helpful and useful for the class.
So on this theme of trust, you talk a lot about it in your first book. Um, and I think that, in certainly in your book and as far as we've gotten into it today, we've really touched on the concept of trust in the context of empowering kids to make, smart decisions on their own, knowing that the adults in their lives have confidence in their ability to do so. But one of the other settings in which trust comes up a lot today in education, and which I would like to talk about, is sort of trust in the education system more broadly. And I know that you have had many occasions in which you have had to sort of calm parents down over the years and tell them to just have a little bit more confidence in the process and have a little bit more confidence in their child, that everything will indeed work out. But I don't know how often these conversations really sort of spilled over into discussions about trust in education systems more broadly. And when I think about statistics like the rising rates of homeschooling in the United States, now we have a renewed focus about concerns about diversity education, perceptions that school systems are interfering with parent-child relationships, new sensitivity and regulation about books that may be challenging, um, even concerns about, rising anti-Semitism and physical safety issues with school shootings. These are all prevalent topics in, the mainstream discourse about public education in the United States. And when I sort of think about it from a macro perspective, what it boils down to is a breakdown in trust in the public education system. And I'm a resident of Montgomery County, Maryland. This county has one of the country's best public school districts. But I know I have doubts, and my children are not old enough to be in the public school system yet. But I have doubts that I don't think my parents ever had or ever sort of had to entertain when they had children in public school in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So I'm wondering, maybe you can talk a little bit about what advice you might have for parents who are nervous about putting their kids in public schools, or sort of how do you process these broader issues that really point to a crisis of trust between schools and parents?
Yes, there is a crisis of trust. I'm sorry to say. It's it's worse in some areas than it is in others. Um, I do think that the policy changes that are happening to us and not with us are creating some of that distrust. I think teachers have an incredibly difficult job of trying to meet the expectations of all the diverse students in their classrooms. Um, I think the reason private schools have grown so much in the past few years is because of this lack of trust. There's another reason that the private schools have grown, and that is because of this push. I should say, I don't know, it's coming from, I guess, multiple sources, this push that there should be no special classes for the advanced students, that everybody should be together in one class, whether they're, 3 years ahead in the subject or 2, 3 years behind.
Hmm.
They all have to have the same instruction and the same teacher. And that creates a lot of problems. I know as a teacher, it would be almost impossible for me to meet the needs of all my students if they were so diverse in their needs. And I would only have your typical 50 minutes with them.
Mm,
That would not work. So I think that that also contributes to distrust in the schools because the parents are saying, are my child's needs being met? And I think in most cases, the child's needs are not being met because if they're really advanced, they don't get their child needs met. If they're really behind, they don't get their needs met either. It's just kids in the middle, and it's questionable who's in the middle, really.
right.
So I think that the education system is the backbone of a democracy. And we're doing a terrible job with the education system now. Um, I don't know, you can look this statistic up, but the majority of Americans, especially in the central part of the United States, not the coasts, read adult Americans read at the sixth grade level.
Which is
And
both shocking and appalling.
shocking and appalling. And then also, unfortunately, students or adults, I should say, of diverse backgrounds, Black, Hispanic, so forth, read at the fourth grade level. And they can't read a lot of these articles that are published that contain a lot of important information because they're primarily a visual learner. They watch TikTok, they watch other video sharing things, they watch news on television. Uh, I'm sorry to say, Fox News I used to call it Fox Fiction. Um, there's a lot of problems, and they are not critical thinkers because they did not learn that critical thinking skill in school.
Mm,
So I'm sorry. So that's why there's a rush to the private schools because your child's needs will be met. Your child, the parents, they'll be heard. If you complain, someone listens. Um, I think we need to rethink what we're doing in the public schools. It's creating a lot of problems for everybody, and it's a problem for us as a country, as a democracy.
and do you think that, sort of solving that problem means, changing the way in which, teachers are held accountable, changing the way in which parents are empowered to, sort of make choices for their children in the public school system? I mean, again, this could turn into a 4 week long conversation about um, how to make a positive change in the administration and, outcomes of public schools. But I'm wondering, for the sake of time, if there's, one or two things that you think most districts could do better, what would they be?
I think it would be great if they could. Number one thing would be if they have classes to meet the needs of the diverse population. So if it's okay for gifted kids to be getting the instruction they need, children with challenges to be getting the instruction they need. You don't want your kid to go to school in a situation where their needs are not being met. And
Right.
I think this push to equality, that everybody's the same, everybody gets the same thing, this is runs against common sense and human nature. You know, I grew up in a situation where that was the case. Back when I was going to school, everybody was in one class, and it was always chaos in the classroom because the kids that were not reading were acting out. The kids that were reading, it was very difficult. Um, and so then we moved to a situation where education was much more effective, where it's called tracking or laning, and
Mm-hmm.
and the tracking or laning actually helped the teacher be a better teacher. And then now it's moved, and I think it's because of all this equality and everything that they moved to the other method, which actually just doesn't work. And I think most parents know that. So, what they could do, I don't want to ask parents to create problems for themselves or for the schools, but if they could, you know, go to PTA meetings or go to school board meetings and talk about how it is a diverse population and we need to meet the needs of that diverse population. And it's okay to have separate classes for different groups depending on their needs. I would say that would be one of the first things that I would advise people to do instead of just abandoning public schools and going to the private schools that are, I said, they're already doing this.
Right. So back to the concept of AI for a few minutes. One of the new education models that I have been tracking is this school or this educational method called 2 hour learning, which was created by a woman named Mackenzie Price. Um, she is an educator, and she essentially developed a learning method that utilizes AI to teach individual lessons to kids for 2 hours a day, and then gives those students, sort of the freedom to pursue their passions in the afternoon. And that could be, doing anything from, starting their own venture capital fund to cooking, to launching a fashion line or anything else, sort of in between. Um, and Mackenzie Price has started a network of schools in Texas and Florida. I know that she's expanding to a few other states, but I've been very intrigued by it, and I see it basically as a rejection of the traditional model of education that we have been, utilizing here in the United States for the last 100 years or so. And it seems to speak very much to what you just talked about, which is sort of tailoring the level of education um, and the pace of learning to the needs of each student. I know that a few years ago in 2019, you founded a nonprofit called Global Moonshots for Education. And from what I could glean from the website, it seems that this nonprofit is dedicated to addressing a lot of the issues that Ms. Price is grappling with. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this new model and a little bit more about what Global Moonshots is doing, and sort of what is the direction that you see K-12 education moving in.
I'm very impressed with Mrs. Price and what she's doing. It aligns pretty much 100% with what I talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I will go on her website. Maybe you can post that for everybody that's listening so that people can go on that together. I think one of the advantages of AI is it can be tailored to the needs of that specific student. And if you don't know how to read, for example, there is AI that will read along with you and
Right.
help sound out the words. So AI can be an incredible help to individualize education to the needs of that particular student. Um, I like the idea of giving kids an opportunity in the afternoon to work on projects they're interested in together with other kids that are maybe interested in the same thing or something slightly different. I think collaboration, that's part of my trick philosophy. Kids need to learn to collaborate. I mean, that's what society is based on. They shouldn't be sitting in class quietly listening to something they're not interested in and then memorizing it, which is basically what's going on in 90% of the schools. So I'm not surprised this is growing 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day. If a kid can learn a lot of information in 2 hours a day, that's already a big deal. And then if they can apply it in the afternoon, that's also a great opportunity. Um, I think this method could even be adopted by the public schools. I mean, it doesn't have to be private, give kids that same method, same opportunity to work independently and to have their needs met. As I said earlier, the number one problem with the public schools is the needs of 90% of those kids are not being met because
Mhm.
it's you just can't meet the needs of everybody by having one single curriculum that's supposed to, I don't know, work with everybody at the same time. It just doesn't work. This equality thing has gone too far.
So can you just tell us a little bit more, because I want people
Global
to,
moonshots. You wanted
yeah,
me to
about
talk.
moonshots. Yes,
So,
love to
global
hear.
moonshots, the goal of global moonshots is to provide the curriculum for schools and to recognize schools that are empowering the student in any way they seem that they decide, instead of empowering the teacher to teach them more. I want the student to be a learner and to be independent and to think for themselves and work together with their peers. Get together a group of 3 or 4 little kids and let them work on a project that they're interested in. So that's what Global Moonshots does. It provides curriculum and also it provides recognition for schools, teachers, programs that actually empower the student.
Understood. Um, so another topic that I think is really critical to discuss when we're, I would say sitting on the cusp of a large scale transformation in the American education system when it comes to AI is this notion of siloing information. And when I say the siloing of information, what I'm thinking about is, the ways in which, algorithms, whether they are broadly tailored or very narrowly tailored, have changed the way that our society digests information. What what information shows up in a person's news feed can differ radically from the information that shows up in their neighbor's news feed. Um, and I think we've had a lot of discourse around this topic in the context of elections. Um, but I don't think that we're immune from it in the realm of education. And I'm curious to know if this is something that you have thought about, um, and any thoughts you might have about sort of striking the right balance between allowing individual students to utilize AI to move their learning process forward at an optimal pace, but also, recognizing that there is value in having a common, educational foundation and ensuring that there's like a core, collection of information that all kids are exposed to, even if they process it differently. Because, I mean, as you said earlier, education is the foundation of our democracy. If we don't have um, a well-educated public that is, conversant in civics and other sort of shared topics, our democratic way of governance is going to go by the wayside.
I think it's absolutely true. The democratic government is actually, unfortunately, suffering at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's primarily because I think the educational needs of the majority of the population were not met. I don't know if you know, but the the only 13.8% of the American population has a 4-year college degree. I mean, it sometimes feels like that is shocking because it looks like everyone's going to college. They might
Yeah.
go, but they don't complete.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think I think we are not meeting the needs of the majority of the population, and we're not meeting the needs of the majority of the adult population. They do get very different information on their feed. So, for example, the Republicans, just to give an example, versus the Democrats, they get very different information, both, I mean, even on Facebook and on X and on all these different groups. That's what they can do. They can customize this, you
Right.
know, and that's what they're doing. And that adds to the polarization of the population. And I don't know how you can change that because I think, AI is sort of in charge at the moment.
At the moment,
And
yes.
and not only that, it's going to become more in charge. Um, you know, Elon is doing a lot of things that I don't agree with. Um, but I think one thing that he does say that I'm worried about is the power of AI to disrupt our civilization. I think he's aware of it. And I think that's one of the reasons he wants to, quote to speak, buy, you know,
OpenAI.
OpenAI because he wants to make it into a nonprofit as opposed to a for-profit.
Well, I think
And
right now it's in a very murky status. I may be under the wrong impression, but I think it was actually founded as a nonprofit,
it,
but it's
it was, yes,
more into more of a for-profit organization. Yeah.
that's right. It's morphed from nonprofit to for-profit. So, I don't really understand his total motivation, but I do think there is a big difference between having a for-profit and a nonprofit. And most people probably haven't thought about it for very long, but I've been thinking about this my whole life. I realize that people in nonprofits work very differently than people in for-profits. That's the most important part.
So, back to this issue of balance. I mean, I think we're going to continue to struggle with this concept of the siloing of information, and um, I think that will really be one of the great challenges that particularly public education systems face in the coming decades as they not only try to strike the balance between what is the right pace of learning for each student, but also, figuring out, um, what needs to be what information needs to be made accessible and understood by all kids. And this is an issue that I have really seen firsthand over the years, as a tutor and mentor, particularly if I'm teaching a topic like, history. Um, is how do you strike this balance between, teaching the academic content that you want your students to be exposed to, but also teaching, life skills and perspective that will help kids, navigate the present world. And there's often a deep tension between that. And, I've, like, just to give one example, I've encountered many students who, have studied ancient Egypt, but they can't tell you anything about the contemporary Middle East or US Egypt relations. And, while it's wonderful to learn about, hieroglyphics and the pyramids, it's actually, the economic trends of the contemporary Middle East and the geopolitical trends, and even, down to bilateral relations in some contexts that are much more relevant, to kids' lives. So, you know, in the past, as I have thought about this, I have typically classified this as a time-based resource constraint, because under optimal conditions you would want to educate kids about both the ancient and the modern. um, but you've spent many years in the classroom, and you have faced these, time constraints yourself. As we move forward with a changing, educational landscape, what advice do you have for educators when it comes to sort of striking this balance between how to navigate the real world and then how to, cover academic material, which is, of intrinsic value, but maybe not applicable for daily use?
Well, in this past 20, 25 years, I would say one of the most controversial subjects in school
Mm-hmm.
is the subject that most people used to fall asleep in, history. So history has now become a highly controversial, sort of politically charged subject. And history teachers get into trouble on a regular basis because they say something, they promote a historical fact that some people don't think is a historical fact. So, what I do or what I recommend doing with everything connected to history, it's actually really complicated, is tying what is going on in the world today to what was going on in the world, I don't know, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So, kids that study ancient Egypt, I would have them study at the same time modern Egypt. Tie that together. How did what was going on in ancient Egypt impact the world in modern times today? And, just gathering that information either online or with the help of generative AI, even that will give them a lot of perspective and make history come alive. And they'll understand the differences. So, for example, I was always teaching these two books, 1984,
Mm-hmm.
1984. The way I taught 1984 is not read the book and take a test. It was read the book and then find examples in the world today of 1984 happening. So tie it to the present world. And, or you can also, the other way to do it is to take what is going on in the world today and then look back historically for what forces might have contributed to that impression or that interpretation of history. Um, Honestly, it's such a complicated world today because there are so many people that get the wrong facts. And once you get those wrong facts, you are reluctant to change them. And so that's one of the big problems. If you get information that is incorrect and you think it's true, you are very reluctant to change it. And that's like, for example, with fake news, one of the number one most impactful fake news stories was that the Pope supports Trump. And do you know that was fake? And the number of people that believed it, even if you come out with a story later on saying it was fake, they still believe it. The
I'm
first
sure it was in the
information you
millions.
get in the millions. And I'm sure there are people here in the United States and the world that still think the Pope supports Trump.
So
So that's
on
terrible. It's a real problem with information because people don't know whether they should believe it or not.
right, and how to verify is going to become, I think, a much more complex process, but one that we're certainly going to need to teach all of our young people.
It's
Um,
already complex, and then you
extraordinarily.
have these videos now, where it looks like that person is actually speaking. They're
The deep
fake,
fakes, the deep
deep
fakes.
fake. Yes. You know, it's the fact that we don't know right from wrong. We can't understand whether this information is true or not. I mean, the whole world is confused.
So, Esther, I do want to give you the opportunity to close on a slightly happier note. Um, I don't know if
Oh,
all of
I'll tell you
I
what
think,
it will be.
okay. So I know our listeners are a very well educated and, thoughtful group of people. And I'm sure that, in recent months, they have also been grappling, whether they're in the United States or abroad, with the tremendous amount of volatility in the world. But yeah, I think in many ways this has been a sobering conversation, but in other ways it has been an encouraging one, because I think that you really see a lot of potential for the positive transformative power of AI in education, and I certainly do. Um, so I'll give you the last word. If there are any sort of parting pearls of wisdom for our audience on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. So, one thing that I'm working on now is an app in both the Android store and the Apple store, and it's called Parenting Trick.
Okay.
And what it is, it's an AI supported app to help parents become trick parents as opposed to helicopter parents. And it gives me hope that if we can have an educated child population that grows into a teenage population that thinks, into an adult population, that will make a big difference in the world. So that's what I've done. The second thing that gives me hope is I'm writing another book with 25 of my former students, 25.
Wow.
And it's about the impact of that's my style of education, giving kids an opportunity to think and to participate and not to just to memorize, the impact that has on their lives and the world. And my hope is that this book can provide more inspiration for teachers and school districts and states, wherever around the country, to change the process of education and to do um, this, what did you call it, 2 hour
2 hour learning.
2 hour learning. Maybe they don't want to do exactly 2 hour learning, but maybe they can do something similar to 2 hour learning. So that gives me hope because we'll give that information to parents.
Esther, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. I want to thank you for your time. So I want to thank you again for all of your contributions, both to education and to parenting, and for the continued positive impact that you're making with young people in the world today. And I hope to speak to you again soon. So thank you on behalf of Fair Observer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the interview.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.